For Edwardian Britons, a Bradshaw's was an indispensable guide to a railway network at its peak. I'm using an early 20th century edition to navigate a vibrant and optimistic Britain at the height of its power and influence in the world. But a nation wrestling with political, social and industrial unrest at home. The last phase of my excursion begins in Glasgow, where at the time of my guidebook, young students were taking up arms, prepared to lay down their lives for king and country. Other boys had taken up their paintbrushes, whilst the king's sister had had a brush with rights for women. My rail journey will carry me to the Highlands, from where I can hoof it. My journey started in Northern Ireland, passing through the city of Belfast. I crossed by ferry to southwest Scotland and made my way to Dumfries. I reached Glasgow, second city of the Edwardian Empire. From there, I'll ascend to the Highlands at Archa and Tarbet, to finish in the countryside at Connell. My final leg begins in Glasgow, where Edwardian students prepared for war. From there, I'll head west along the Clyde to an artist's haven in Helensburgh. I'll follow one of my favourite railways through Argyll and reach a royal castle from Archa and Tarbet. My journey will end on the shores of Loch Etive at Connell Ferry.
Halt!
On this trip, I fall into line.
Above! Halt! Baton! Keep these hands pinned down to the side!
I get acquainted with a celebrated Scottish beast. Could you make the introductions, please?
This is Lily.
Hello, Lily. And I head to the Highlands. How do you enjoy working on the West Highland line?
I love it every day.
Today I'm in Glasgow, a city at the height of its prestige in the Edwardian period. In the West End sits the university, where at the time of my Bradshaws, a new organisation was recruiting the student rank and file. People may tend to think of Glasgow as essentially a 19th century industrial conurbation, maybe even as a city of brawn rather than brain. Well, its university was founded in 1451, nearly 400 years before London's, and that's more than 150 years before King James VI of Scotland took the English throne. And since then, the university's gallant graduates have served a united kingdom. I've come to investigate an early 20th century invention, the Officer Training Corps. With war in Europe on the horizon, the government began to enlist students to command the army.
Michael, welcome to Glasgow and Strathclyde University's Officers Training Corps.
Thank you so much. Privileged to be here. Retired Major Brian Simpson, the former adjutant, is now the unit's historian. Well, you have a magnificent drill hall. What was the origin, then, of Officer Training Corps?
It came from the Haldane reforms. Richard Haldane, Secretary of War for the Liberal government, 1905 to 1912. The army had not done very well in the Second Boer War, and under Army Order 160, copy of which we've got here, they brought about the Officers Training Corps.
And these reforms then took off in the universities of the day. When did the idea reach Glasgow?
Glasgow was one of the first. In fact, they set up a military education committee, and in November 1908, Glasgow, being a very patriotic city then, had its OTC coming into effect. But
within just 6 years, the time for training was over. The young men of Glasgow's Officer Training Corps, like some 15,000 of their colleagues in other British universities, joined units of the British Army in the trenches of the Western Front. This would be from the period, would it?
This is from the Great War. Our pipes and drums paid a particularly heavy price. Of the approximately 40 men in the picture, only 3 of those survived the Great War. Pipers, in particular, paid a heavy price. They were part of Scotland's martial tradition, so they would pipe the men over the top, and very often were the first ones to pay the price.
And of all those men pictured, just 3 survived the Great War. That's incredibly poignant, isn't it?
It is, yes.
During the course of the First World War, 336 men from Glasgow's Officer Training Corps lost their lives. The OTC lived on, and today's students still prepare for battle. I'm inspecting current cadets with Lieutenant Colonel Rory Shannon, commanding officer.
Right! Turn!
So, you've got a sizable parade here. How many actually do you have in your Glasgow University OTC now?
We currently have 164 officer cadets and a small staff providing the training and training support for them.
Were you in the OTC?
I was. I spent 4 years in the Officer Training Corps, and that absolutely is why I ended up joining the Army. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope I can engender similar passion and enthusiasm in these ladies and gentlemen.
But then supposing they don't pursue a military career, what will they benefit if?
Many will go on to commission into the regular or reserve army, but many will choose not to. And for those that don't, the leadership development and opportunities that they've had in the OTC will hopefully mean that when they go on to become captains of industry, leaders of business, that they are great advocates for the military in the future.
Students train in the Officer Training Corps alongside their regular studies. Good morning, my name is Michael.
Morning, Officer Cadet Amy MacDonald.
Amy, lovely to see you. What made you think of joining the OTC?
I play bagpipes and came to the university looking to find somewhere to do that and found an interest in the training that's delivered here. I've done everything from a gun salute for the Queen's birthday. I've went across to play in the Basel Tattoo or the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, and we've been across to do military training in Cyprus, Gibraltar and down in Catterick.
Well, thank you so much for talking
No
to me.
worries.
I wonder whether I have what it takes to make an officer cadet. RSM, Portillo reporting, sir.
Mr. Portillo, OK, I'm going to ask you to participate in some foot drill at the hall. Are you prepared for this?
Yes, sir.
Good. Mr. Portillo, I would like you to dress in and form in on the ranks there. There's a space there at the front rank. On you go.
Hey, attention! Mr. Portillo, bend and drive. Leg parallel with the ground. Sned. Now! Turn! Get again, Mr. Portillo! About! Turn! Mr. Portillo, keep these arms pinned down to the side! About! Turn! Keep that mouth closed, Mr. Portillo, you'll catch flies! Right! Turn!
So, how do you think you got on, Mr. Portillo?
RSM, I'm afraid I may have let the unit down, sir, but I am almost as old as the university.
Not too shabby, but not great. And remember, most importantly, keep that mouth closed when you conduct the movement so you don't want to be choking on any flies.
Yes, sir.
Happy?
I think the open mouth comes from my previous career, sir. I'm leaving Glasgow from the city's Queen Street station and heading west. Here, the railway hugs the waterline and tracks the Firth of Clyde. Before Glasgow experienced an industrial revolution, great minds cloistered in its university had helped to launch the Enlightenment, a revolution that spanned from philosophy to science. From the late 19th century, the city contributed to innovations in painting and design. I'll alight at Helensburgh in search of the most famous artistic group. Less than 25 miles from Glasgow, Helensburgh was a popular destination for city dwellers escaping the metropolis. That was a beautiful train ride along the shores of the River Clyde. I can see why artists would want to head out here with their easels. As the second city of the empire, Glasgow's wealth supported a flourishing Scottish art scene. One group of artists, known as the Glasgow Boys, pioneered a style that rebelled against the sentimental art of the Victorian era. The Anderson Trust owns a collection of the artist's paintings. Mary Jane Selwood is a trustee. Hello, Mary Jane.
Welcome.
I'm looking forward to talking about the Glasgow Boys. The Glasgow Boys wanted respite from the city and to paint ordinary people in front of nature, and Helensburgh offered the perfect retreat.
The first one here is by James Guthrie, probably the most famous one of the Glasgow Boys and of the pictures we have here. James Guthrie became quite well known beyond Scotland. It's been recognised by art historians as probably the most perfect thing that Guthrie ever did.
What's it called?
Stormy Twilight. In 1890, he spent a while in Helensburgh, devoting himself to creating about 50 or so of these pastels.
Well, I see here the ladies' dresses are reflected, so water has fallen. The water is looking a bit stormy, and we know it's twilight because we've just got these gleaming lights inside the buildings. You could almost mistake that for an impressionist.
Well, I think they are very closely related. It's maybe a little bit more economical in its brushstrokes, and also their subject matter is very often more ordinary or more commonplace.
So what's the importance, historically, of the Glasgow Boys?
Mainly as pioneers, every age has to have a reaction, and they were reacting, as I said, to the rather stilted form of painting of before. There were movements afoot of a similar nature in England and in Europe and all over, but they were the first in Scotland.
Thank you for telling me about the Glasgow Boys. Less well known were the Glasgow Girls. Maggie Hamilton, sister of the Glasgow boy James Whitelaw Hamilton, was also an artist. She married Alexander Nisbet Patterson, brother of another Glasgow boy. I've come to visit their home, the Longcroft, which is now owned by Deborah Carlson. Hello, Deborah.
Welcome to the Longcroft.
Well, a fascinating-looking house. Turrets and balconies and all sorts of things. Deborah, the Longcroft is a remarkable house and in a terrific state of conservation. Tell me how it came to be built.
It was built by a husband and wife couple who grew up in Helensburgh, Maggie Hamilton and Alexander Nisbet Patterson, in 1901 and 1902. And they called in quite a lot of their friends to help with the detail and all the ornament that they wanted to create this house.
Were they a partnership?
One was an architect, Alexander Patterson, and Maggie Hamilton was an embroideress.
So would I be right in thinking that that piece is by her?
Yep, she did that to hang above the fireplace.
And what about these other details here? These stained glass windows, very striking, aren't they?
They all reflect the interest the family had in embroidery, architecture, and painting. Alexander was famous for his carving, and above the front door you have Alistair's face and Viola's face, his two children. And above that, over the top of the door, is a crest with Alexander's initials and Maggie Hamilton's initials. She rather famously kept her maiden name.
Alexander and Maggie designed an arts and crafts house that was modern, middle class. The open-plan rooms and lack of staff quarters catered to a couple who, with few servants, liked to entertain. With their family connections, they knew many of the Glasgow Boys. Was the house a gathering point for the Glasgow Boys to come and work?
Yes. Lots of them came down on the train on weekends, brought their paints, and they had very productive weekends.
Owning this house, do you have a great sense of responsibility?
Very much so. I think you feel that you need to keep what they achieved alive and remind people of all the artists that were connected with this town.
At Helensburgh Upper, I'm joining a railway line that was new at the time of my Bradshaws. It's wonderful to be back on the West Highland Line, one of the most beautiful routes in Britain and a personal favourite of mine. And as we approach the Highlands, the summer evenings seem to go on forever, and it will still be light when I arrive at the splendidly named Aracha and Tarbet. I'll continue my journey tomorrow. Today I'm making an excursion deep into the Highlands. I've made my way to Inveraray, the ancestral home of the Clan Campbell and the Dukes of Argyll. There's no station nearby, as the 7th Duke refused permission for a railway line on his land. Given its great beauty, he can be forgiven. Even by the high standards of the Scottish Highlands, Inveraray is picturesque. Turns out there's a good reason for that. When the Dukes of Argyll decided to build a castle in the 18th century, they moved the old village from where it was and created a new model Inveraray. Those aristocrats certainly had a great deal of power. Fortunately, good taste too. The Campbells have had a home on the shores of Loch Fyne since the 15th century. Part of the Black Watch, they supported the British government when Bonnie Prince Charlie attempted to claim the throne in the 1740s. By the time of my Bradshaws, they'd reached new heights after Princess Louise, daughter of Queen Victoria, married the heir to the 8th Duke.
Michael, welcome to Inveraray Castle.
Kenny, thank you so much. It's my first ever visit, and it is spectacular.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Kenny White is a guide at the castle. Kenny, what a glorious library this is. Tell me about this.
Well, this is the Brown Library, and this was actually constructed by the 8th Duke of Argyll.
What do we know about Princess Louise's character?
Well, Louise was born in 1848, the year of revolutions, and her mother always maintained that she was such a boisterous and perhaps unusual child because she was born in that very turbulent period. A very intelligent young girl. She was interested in politics, social issues of the day, perhaps today we would call the suffragette movement.
Princess Louise was Victoria and Albert's 6th child. A talented artist and sculptor, she created a statue of her mother for Kensington Gardens. When she was thought to be getting too close to her sculpture tutor, Queen Victoria set about finding her a husband. For the first time since 1515, a daughter of the sovereign would marry a commoner. And in those days, it was unusual, to put it mildly, for royalty not to marry royalty.
Oh, yes, that's interesting because, you see, I believe that the Marquis of Lorne was considered to be suitable because, although he was a commoner, he was certainly a big cheese in the west coast of Scotland, the elder son of the 8th Duke of Argyll. And we've got a letter here. And this letter, interestingly, is actually to the 8th Duke of Argyll. This is from the Marquis of Lorne to his father. And it's announcing that Louise has accepted his offer of marriage.
So, a letter on Balmoral Castle paper, October the 3rd, 1870. Dearest P, probably Papa, Louise has consented to become my wife. We had a tea at Lochdew House, and the Chancellor, Lady Ely, Louise, and I. And as we walked up to the upper lake, I told her what I felt for her. Isn't that charming? Her brother Bertie, later King Edward VII, disapproved of her marrying a commoner. Nevertheless, Louise was Bertie's ally amongst his sisters, and when Queen Victoria died, she played a trusted role in his coronation. So then, did King Edward VII come to visit his sister at Inveraray Castle?
No, he didn't come to visit here, no. In fact, there's another document there, a diary from Duke Neil Campbell in 1902. There was a proposal of a visit, but that visit actually did not take place.
The King and Queen, who are at Broderick in Arran, are not coming here. The King was told he could not be entertained at the castle as there are no servants, so he would have slept on the yacht. Oh dear. So it just seems that they didn't feel financially able to entertain the King.
I think the issue there is a royal visit could bankrupt you. You've got to remember the 8th Duke had died in 1900. The Marquis of Lorne have now taken the title as 9th Duke of Argyll. So this is an indication of them coming to terms with the reality of a new era.
At the time of my guidebook, many aristocrats were struggling to keep up their vast estates. And even with a princess for a duchess, the Argylls were no exception. Hugh Nicol is the castle's factor, managing the estate on behalf of the Duke.
Hugh, I'm getting the impression that at the beginning of the 20th century, the estate was quite short of money.
Yes, with any family, and it's probably more documented here, there's always ups and downs. 1877, there was a fire here, and that took 50 years to really get on top of. And you only need one generation who enjoy cafe society or get involved in some other thing they perhaps shouldn't, and that takes another couple of generations to sort out.
It is possible to be asset rich and cash poor.
Yes, it's common for houses like this and big estates. This area isn't a particularly rich area. The ground isn't particularly fertile, so a lot of the people have quite a hard existence, and so the rents are relatively low compared to perhaps lowland areas.
I mean, coming up to the present day, how do you make an estate like this work?
With difficulty, you have to diversify. We've got 70-odd people working here, and most of them have different jobs because we have to do a lot of different things. We've got forestry, we've got farming, we've got tourism, crofting, a whole diversity.
How many people do you get visiting the castle?
We have 116,000 last year, and that's been going up 15% per annum for the last few years.
Well, I hope the numbers continue to go up. I've enjoyed my first visit, and I think the story of Princess Louise and the Marquis of Lorne ought to attract visitors in the future.
I hope so.
I'm rejoining the West Highland line and travelling north. Until the railway reached Fort William in 1894, it was almost impossible for the tourist to visit this spectacular region.
Hello there.
Hello.
You got your tickets?
I have indeed. How do you enjoy working on the West Highland line?
I love it every day.
How long have you been in the job?
I've worked here for 1 year on the train, and I've worked in the booking office for about 6 years. My father's been a guard for 39 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Your father a guard for 39 years on the same line?
Same line.
He must be very proud of you.
It's very proud.
So it's in the blood, is it?
In the blood.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Upper-class guests from Inverary Castle were not the only creatures of breeding to use the West Highland line. Other pedigree passengers regularly used the train to travel south from the Highlands. They had strictly one-way tickets and 4 legs.
Bye.
My final stop is Connaught Ferry, in the countryside outside Oban. The Achnacloich estate is home to Scotland's oldest continuously owned fold or herd of Highland cattle and was founded in 1901. I'm on my way to inquire into the origins of this Scottish icon. Angus Mackay is an expert in these matters.
I'm Michael.
Pleased to meet you, Michael.
And could you make the introductions, please?
This is Lily.
Hello, Lily.
And Johnny.
Hi there.
The hat handler, the man in charge.
Tell me about the characteristics of the breed. I mean, obviously the long hair, what difference does that make?
That's vitally important. That's really what protects them from the weather. This long flowing hair casts the rain, just as the thatch on a roof would cast the weather. You can have a rainfall here of in excess of 90 inches. You have, on occasion, an 8-month winter. Hair is very, very important.
I take it that Lily is a pedigree animal.
She is indeed. The Lily family can be traced back to the very origins of the Achnacloich fold, 120 years ago almost.
And how important is the Achnacloich fold?
It would be no exaggeration to say that had it not been for the Achnacloich fold of Highland cattle, the Highland breed worldwide would not be where it is today. Cattle have left here over the last 80 years and gone to every corner of the globe. The Peruvian Andes have gone to Australia, the United States.
Johnny, what is it you're doing there?
I'm just giving her a wee rub to keep her calm.
And do you find an easy animal to deal with?
Yes, aye, she's very peaceful.
She's done awfully well today, hasn't she? It's a warm day.
Aye.
She must be wanting to move on. In fact, why don't we let you do that?
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Johnny. I'm assuming that even historically, the meat wasn't just consumed locally.
No, they certainly were not. They were far too valuable to be consumed locally. The cattle eventually were consumed in London, being fattened in Yorkshire and in the Norfolk Broads, which was ideally suited to fattening Highland cattle.
But that's extraordinary. I mean, before the railways, before there were decent roads, how did they get across those distances?
They would have walked the whole way, leaving the trysts of Falkirk, taking at least 4 weeks to get to Norfolk.
Sounds more like Texas than Britain.
Where do you think the best cattle drovers came from?
Oh, did they?
They did indeed.
Well, I suppose the railways turned out to be quite useful when they came along.
Overnight, they revolutionised the way in which livestock were marketed. All the markets were built adjacent to the railways for ease of handling, and off they would go by rail.
Achnacoich had its own railway siding for loading Highland cattle, which remained in use until the 1950s. The Nelson family still owns the Achnacoich herd, and Lorne Nelson is showing me the animals in their natural habitat.
Lorne, I'm not a countryman, but that is an extraordinarily beautiful sight, is it not?
I couldn't agree with you more. That's what Highland cattle are bred for this landscape, and that's where they look best.
And your family goes back how far with Highland cattle?
We bought Achnacoich in 1892 and inherited a herd at the time, and all that we have done since then is to build it up over a period of about 100 years.
It's obviously still an active business which is carried out in the Highlands, and for the person visiting the Highlands, one of the most characteristic and attractive sights.
One doesn't like to use the word iconic, but the Highland cow really is a part of the Scottish landscape. I don't think there's anyone in the world who wouldn't associate the one with the other. So somebody's got to keep them going.
Long may it continue. Thank you so much, Lord.
Not at all.
My rail excursion began in Ulster, where, at the time this book was published, civil war loomed, and crossed to Clydeside, where revolution was feared. After the Great War, Ireland fought a war of independence, and the island was partitioned. But in Great Britain, socialist energies were channeled into democracy, and a new constitutional party was formed, Labour, which held office during the 1920s. Today, hot topics in British politics include the Irish border and how socialist the Labour Party should be.
Next time, I hear how Lawrence of Arabia suffered for his student thesis.
He was mugged, robbed, beaten, and left for dead. But he came back with the notes it took to write a brilliant undergraduate dissertation.
I managed to make even a car grin.
So, Greg, we put on the familiar smiling mini face there, haven't we? That design, it just sort of gets to you, doesn't it?
And I'm transported, not by rail, but by music.
Are the last that will never be old.